Aloha, and thank you for joining me again for another edition of A Better Day. I'm Sam Slom, and for the next half hour, I think you're going to find this program enjoyable and informative. We're going to be talking about the Fourth Estate, journalism. But first, the legislature is over. It's finally over, say some people, and now it's the price to pay. This was not a very productive legislative session in terms of trying to control our expenditures, trying to make programs better. It was a session where the Council of Revenue said, hey, we found more money for you. And the governor said, hey, let's spend that money. And the legislature said, hey, we'll be glad to do that. And so what emerged was nearly a $24 billion budget, which has tremendous salary increases and implications with our public worker unions, new programs, retaining existing workers, putting vacant positions back to work, all of these things. The bottom line for you, the taxpayer, is where does the money come from? It doesn't come from here in the big square building. It comes from your purse and wallet. And that's the problem. We already have an unfunded liability in the state, and that means programs in the employees' retirement system and the health care system for employees. It's an unfunded liability of some $25 billion, the worst in the United States. But in addition to that, now we have a $24 billion biennium budget, meaning over the next 2 years, and a lot of expenditures. We have a problem here. The problem is not lack of revenues. We are overtaxed and overburdened. The citizens in Hawaii are the third highest taxed in terms of state and local taxation in the nation. We rank number one in the amount of food stamps that are provided. We're only number 3 in homelessness, but we're working our way up. We're doing our best. And we won't even talk about roads and the government's responsibility for that. So we've got a lot of problems. We don't seem to solve our problems, and this legislative session, like so many previously, added more task forces, studies, and blue ribbon panels. That's what we love to do. We study our problems, we don't solve them, and yet we're spending billions of dollars, and you are going to be asked to pay more in fees, in special amounts, and in taxes as the years come. We've got a lot of problems ahead, but in spite of all that, it is a better day, and we can make it a better day because if you get involved in your government, if you hold all of us responsible for the things that we do and the things that we say, then we can have a better government. The problem is, of course, our last election, less than 50% of you turned out to vote. We used to be number 1 in the nation. Now we're number 50 in the nation in terms of that. That's really disgraceful and inappropriate when we talk about democracy and people taking part. You've got opportunities to do it. I know it may be difficult, and I know it may seem from time to time that you can't fight City Hall. Well, talk to me about that. I know about that. But you can get involved, and you must get involved because we've got to change our course. The state budget director, Calbert Young, who was on this program previously, he said in a public forum a couple of months ago that by 2017, if we don't increase taxes or have new revenue sources, that the state of Hawaii is going to be bankrupt. Bankrupt, the state. Now, this is not far-fetched because we see large cities on the mainland who have declared their own bankruptcy. We have states that are having a difficult time, and the problem is not getting more money from its citizens. The problem is every time there's a new dollar that's found, the government, the legislature, or the Congress finds $2.50 worth of how to spend it. So that's the problem that we have. But in spite of that, I don't want you to lose faith or lose confidence. You've got the ability to make the changes and to make this a better day. Well, one of the things that we depend on in our society is a free and open press, a press that is independent of government and special interests and is free to report on what goes on in our community, to allow us to know, to help us to synchronize different issues and to really take positions and to be knowledgeable when we vote or when we take part. So we're going to look today at what the status of that industry is, and particularly in light of some legislative initiatives during this past legislative session. And I'm very happy to have as our special guest today 2 giants of the industry. They may not be giant in stature, but they are giants in terms of their professional experience. First of all, Mr. Gerald Kato and Mr. Stirling Morita, both of whom are professional journalists and we're going to have to look at the definition of that because that was raised during the legislature, but also people that have been involved in their community, and they're watching many of the changes that are taking place in the industry and in the delivering of news and all that. So first of all, Gerald, welcome, and could you give us a brief Gerald Kato 101?
Sure, Sam. Thank you very much. You know, I've been involved with journalism in Hawaii for a long time. Looking back now, you know, I was in high school when I first worked at the Honolulu Advertiser. I was what they called a copy boy back then. I think they call it the name has changed, but basically I ran out and got coffee for everybody, and we refilled the paste pots. We used to have paste pots back then. And,
I remember them, yeah.
In any case, so I go back a long ways with journalism. After graduating from the University of Hawaii with a degree in journalism, I went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism, the oldest school of journalism in the country, I might add. Worked briefly in California at a newspaper there. Came back to Honolulu, worked at the Honolulu Advertiser for 11 years. Most of that time I was a government and political reporter. Then I decided, well, you know, it's time to switch medium, so I went into television. Worked at KITV, then KGMB as a political reporter and assignment editor. So a lot of years doing reporting in the field.
You've done a lot of different things. You've seen a lot of technological changes.
A lot of technological
You've seen other changes, which we'll talk about.
A lot of technological changes, and then I went to the University of Hawaii to teach journalism. And as you note, I've seen a lot of changes. You know, I talk to my students sometimes about typewriters and carbon paper.
They look at you with a blank stare. Yeah.
So you can imagine journalism has changed a lot in many ways, and in some ways I hope not at all, because I think the principle of fairness, balance, objectivity still remains fundamental to doing good journalism.
And you're still at the university now teaching?
I'm still at the university teaching journalism. Anybody interested in becoming a journalism major, see me.
See Gerald. And Stirling, Morita, likewise. I mean, you've had a long career, and you've been involved in a lot of different aspects of journalism. Now you head up the Society for Professional Journalists. And what else are you up to?
I started out in Illinois, or actually Iowa, about the same time Gerald was probably getting out of school, and probably from Davenport, Iowa to the Chicago suburbs, 2 papers in the Chicago suburbs, for coming to the Honolulu Star Bulletin. And that was 1977, so that was quite a while ago. Seen a lot of, some of that time at the Star Bulletin was running head-to-head with Gerald on stories, or his wife, one of the two.
Yeah.
And
that was back in the day when we actually had competition.
Well,
too,
we had competition, and we actually covered government very carefully, closely.
Yeah.
And we been basically a reporter, mostly covering government, courts, and then moved on to city desk, and now a night city editor at the Honolulu Star Advertiser. The organization I head up is called the Hawaii chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, and it's an organization that's dedicated toward professional development within the field, the education, ethics in the field, promoting young students and helping out young students get a footing in the business, and it's and openness in government, which we spend a lot of our time doing.
And every year you have a very ambitious awards program,
yes,
awards banquet as
yes,
well.
Yes, we do, and we like to use it to promote our interns, because people are astounded how small a chapter we can have so many interns and provide money, thanks to our Gridiron show, which will be August 23 to August 24th.
That's always a sellout. Everybody goes to see that, right? Yeah.
Okay.
When you take funny positions about politicians, and politicians are not funny, doggone it. Well, look, you know, years ago, people, I think, always, well, first of all, they picked up their daily newspaper, probably the morning paper and the evening paper. They like to crinkle that and all of that. But they looked to the newspapers, they looked to the news media to tell them really what was going on, what was in the background. And we had tremendous examples of investigative reporters in the past and people that had a great deal of confidence. I mean, we talked about Walter Cronkite was the epitome, Edward R. Murrow, right here, Bob Seavey. These were people that other people looked up to. I would maintain that that's not so much the case today, and that in place of a lot of the investigative reporting and the really hard digging, you've got people that read copy that somebody else has prepared for them. Am I wrong about this, or what's happened?
Well, a lot of it, I think, Sam, is a product of the business of journalism. The business of journalism is contracting. I think the careers of Stirling and I illustrate this. Sterling worked at the Star Bulletin at one time. I worked at the Honolulu Advertiser. You now have the two newspapers. You now have one newspaper called the Star Advertiser. I worked at the KGMB News at one time. KGMB is now part of a duopoly operation with KHNL and K5, consolidated into
Hawaii News Now.
Hawaii News Now, which is one newsroom that operates 3 stations. There are a lot fewer news outlets, mainstream news outlets. Having said that, non-traditional outlets have been expanding. You have things like Civil Beat, which didn't exist 10 years ago. Hawaii Reporter. You have bloggers, Ian Lind and others who do blogs on news and public affairs. So you do have the more what we describe as non-traditional outlets, but the traditional outlets are really getting smaller and smaller. The staffs are getting smaller and smaller, and they're required to do more and more with less and less resources.
Does technology substitute for that? Has technology made it easier to have less people doing things?
Technology has done a lot in terms of having less people, at least on the technological end. I mean, you look at in the day when I was on television, we had to have a whole crew of people on the floor and technicians in the control room. Nowadays, you robotic cameras, cameras. 2 people in the control room, maybe even one can run the entire show. So in that sense, technology has done a lot in terms of arguably even making putting on a show, for example, more efficient. But I would contend, and people who know me know I've made this argument over and over again, that real reporting requires boots on the ground. You need people, you need well-trained people who know something about the community out there digging up the information. And for the kind of reporting that we need, you need to give people some time to develop sources, some time to develop the story. You're not going to have an investigative piece turned out
right. That's probably the best example. And you mentioned, I mean, the industry is a business, and business decisions are made on bottom lines. And for example, if you have an investigative reporter or team, I mean, we all go back to the days of Woodward and Bernstein. Who would have the time and the money to invest in all of the things that they did at that time, and the trips and going back and forth and doing all of that? But as a consequence of that, I guess the question arises, is the reporting that's done today of a quality equal to what we had before? Particularly, let's keep it to Hawaii. Are we getting the most bang for our buck? Are we getting real investigations of what's going on in government and business and labor unions? Come on, Sterling.
I'll let Sterling go first.
Come on, Sterling.
Probably on the overall number, we probably have I would guess reduced number of stories. I don't know necessarily the quality of them are necessarily any worse than they were, but simply and this may sound like an excuse, but many of our reporters are doing many different tasks. It's not just a matter of reduced numbers overall in the business, but it's also they're doing more things. They're because of the competition on the internet or because of TV. They might be actually shooting a video or taking a picture at the scene, or maybe blogging or writing a blog or sending out a breaking news item at the same time while they're doing all these other things. There's so much competition for their time. It's not like the heyday. I grant you, back in the 70s, I think it was really competitive.
Okay, listen to this. Some people say, now, I think you'll both agree with me that we've cut down the amount of coverage of government. And particularly that's true in TV. I mean, TV used to be here all the time, every day for the sessions and all, hoping that somebody would say something dumb, which they usually get their hope. But they would be here every day. Now they don't show up.
Yeah.
And that's one thing. The other thing is the charge has been made that a lot of the so-called reporters, and I say so-called, and we'll get into that in a minute too about definitions, but some of the reporters, they don't do certain stories because their end game is not to stay in journalism, but to work for a high-profile politician or as a communications director or something like that. True or false?
False.
False.
That's not true.
You hope that's not.
I know of no reporter who has ever had that in, or ever said they were interested.
But you do know of reporters that have
done
transitioned
that.
into government for the mayor, the governor.
That's true.
And all of that.
I do know. I don't think that they necessarily planned it. You know, I know many of the folks who have transitioned into government, and I in fairness to them, I think some of that involved economic reasons. I mean, it's
You
part
mean
of
reporters have to eat too?
They have to eat too, and you know,
got
the business of journalism is such that they're not paying the kind of money that I was making even when I left the newspaper. I think your average newspaper reporter now is getting less than I was making when I left the newspaper, and that was almost 30 years ago.
Maybe you were overpaid, Jerry.
Or maybe I was overpaid.
That's why there's no Honolulu Advertiser anymore.
I think maybe the editors felt that way. But I do think that some of it is economic as much as anything else. That they and it's a commentary on the problem here that that you can make more doing a government job, my God, than you can doing the people's business and writing news stories.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. And it's interesting because if you look at other professions, if you look at sports, I mean, the way it was in the old days, a young baseball player hardly earned anything. Now you've got minimums and things like that. Teachers were always underpaid, and people would maintain they're still underpaid, but they're a lot better off than they had been before with compensation and all. So a reporter, it is difficult, and yet you're out there, you're hustling for people, you're even on this show trying to get people to sign up. Is it still a good profession? Is it still a good future?
You know, I think it is a good profession. As I've told people before, and this is just my personal perspective, it's a great profession. It's a lousy business.
That's a good way of putting it.
It's you know, I can look back on my time as a reporter and believe that in some small way my stories made a difference on any particular day. You know, it's not going to change history or anything like that, but I felt good about doing stories.
Now, during this legislative session, there was one particular piece of legislation that was in the forefront. You guys, with other colleagues from print media, from radio, TV, got involved, and that was the so-called Journalism Shield bill and all. And one of the things that came up during that, the early discussions, was who is a journalist? How do you define a journalist, particularly with technological changes and all that? And is somebody who does a blog or somebody who does a regular electronic report, should they be considered the same as a reporter that goes to a brick and mortar office. What's your response to that?
I think so. I don't know if you remember, maybe a lot of people won't remember this, but back Saturday Night Live used to have this skit routine that was really hilarious. There'd be this comedian who'd come out, he'd have a satellite dish on his head.
Oh, yeah.
He'd have
Wasn't that Al Franken?
Al Franken, I think it was Al Franken.
Now United States Senator.
He had a camera on his shoulder,
Yes.
or on his forehead, right?
Right.
And a notepad, and
Yep.
and he was doing all these multitasks together, and that's what journalism seems to be going toward. It was hilarious at the time, but now I look back on it, more and more we're all starting to do some of those things together.
And people
so-
don't pick up their daily newspaper, and they don't have to wait for the 6 o'clock news. They can get it
Yeah.
instantaneously,
Right.
24/7. So
So-
that's part of it. But
So the people who do those things very often will be these one-man shops, if you will.
But
And
suppose the
that-
person has not gone to the University of Missouri or does not have a journalism degree. Is that person entitled to the same kinds of recognition?
Sure, a couple of things. You know, there are a lot of professional journalists who never went to journalism school and cut their teeth in learning journalism in a newsroom setting. Now, I think the discussion about who's a journalist may be a little bit misguided in this sense, that it's not so much who's a journalist, but what is it the journalists do? A journalist presumably gathers and disseminates news and information in the public interest, news and information of public concern, and that fits the role of a lot of professional journalists, people who do it for a living. But there are other people who share that public concern, who may be doing blogs. There are blogs in this state, for example, about the Hawaii Supreme Court rulings. You have Ian Lynn, who has a mix of personal and
If you
political.
like cats, you got to read him.
You like cats? He's in there, but he also does some stories of public concern, of public interest, and there are other blogs of that sort. Now, you know, I've long contended that just because you own a computer or a video camera doesn't make you a journalist, but it's what you do with those tools that matters. And so, you know, we shouldn't, especially now, we shouldn't be in that situation where we denigrate people who are not professional journalists. We denigrate them as bloggers, or you know, they're not real journalists. Well, let's see what kind of work they're producing and judge them by what their
See, I think
their work
you two
product
are
is.
very ecumenical about this and very liberal, if I may use the term, compared to what a lot of other people say and have said, including politicians. And yet, we go back to look at the so-called professional journalists who were well known and all that, and we see things where stories were made up, where things didn't happen, and all of that. In fact, prizes were handed out and then later had to be rescinded. So really, I guess it gets down to the truth. And whoever produces the truth, and we have a new way of distributing news and receiving it. We had this Journalism Shield Bill, and we just have a little bit of time left, but we had this Journalism Shield Bill, one of the best in the country, one of the first in the country for 5 years. And it seems now we're going to go back to the common law and have to deal with that. What are your comments on that and your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that the Shield Law that was put together 5 years ago is one of the best in the country because it deals with what's happening in journalism. Journalism is changing. As we noted earlier, there are fewer and fewer mainstream outlets. I suspect within the next 10, 20 years, with all due respect to Stirling, there's not going to be a newspaper. They may be online, they may be distributed on your phone, or there may be other means of obtaining the information. But journalism is changing. And
Continuing to evolve.
it's
right?
continuing to evolve.
Although there's still a place for papers. I mean, Gannett, that used to own the Advertiser, they're still the most profitable publishing company. They own 80 papers. I guess the average circulation is around 25,000, so they're making money doing that. But the Journalism Shield Bill, just to wrap this up, people described that as it was reckless, and they described it as protecting journalists so they could, or people could write anything or say anything. It really wasn't like that, was it?
No.
In fact, it's just the opposite.
It's the opposite.
And there were benchmarks, but it was to protect sources. And any journalist, any person worth their salt will protect their sources, because if they don't, then they're never going to get that
getting more
coverage again.
information to make sure all the information is true. And it has the opposite effect of what they were being accused of.
Well, this has been most interesting, and the time just flew by, and we're going to have to re-examine this again, and I'm sure if I can invite you two back, because there's more to be said. Journalism is a keystone and the foundation of our nation and our community. We need more of it, not less. We need to encourage people to scope out the problems, because Lord knows we got enough problems here in Hawaii. You never run out of anything to write about, right? That's the good news.
Well, and that's why, Sam, I'm hoping for a better day in journalism.
There you go. Well, we can all agree on that. A better day. Look, it's been wonderful having Stirling Morita and Gerald Kato. And if you're interested in journalism or pursuing a career, get in touch with these two gentlemen or get in touch with us. This is Sam Slom thanking you for coming here and spending your time with us. As always, contact me for any information, and have a better day. Aloha.